So yeah, my name's Nicky Vadera, and for those people that I haven't met, I'm a solution architect at SUGCON, working primarily with Content Hub. And I want to just kind of run through a few experiences that I've had with the external components in 4.2 based on real customer requirements. It's kind of code heavy on some slides, and so feel free to take photos, but I've also got a QR code at the end that will link to the blog that goes with this, that goes into far more detail and is far more useful. I've had to kind of condense it for the sake of the 15-minute time span, and we don't want to be running into lunch, so I'll try and be strict on keeping to it. So firstly then, why am I specifically talking about Content Hub 4.2? And the answer to that is really because of the change from 4.1 to 4.2, that external components are now React-based rather than knockout-based. And that, on first look, can seem like a small change, but actually I think it's a really good and positive step. It means that we have the possibility to bring in all of those React frameworks and use the power of them, particularly, and I'm going to talk about this in a second, the Material UI library, because that's the one that Content Hub uses internally for its components. So, of course, I have to start with the hello world, right? I'm going to do this. It's very simple, of course. It's a hello world component. But the key here is that the reason I've added this is because I have created a kind of starter template on GitHub that means you can just focus on writing React, and it sorts out the pipeline of producing for you the JavaScript file to go and host either externally and reference from Content Hub, or actually host locally for development. And there's a really interesting piece there, right? It took me a long time to work this out, and I spent ages doing, trying to configure local tunnel and all that kind of stuff to get a public URL for this external component that I had locally. And then I kind of had a light bulb moment that Content Hub loads the external component client side, so you don't need to bother with that, right? You can just host it locally, and that makes development so much easier. I have to caveat, and I'll touch on it at the end, that the starter template has its flaws, right? It's not perfect. It's not my area of expertise, but that's why I want to mention it, because there's also a kind of call for help here in terms of there's going to be people that are far more capable with Webpack and that kind of stuff that can really help make that much better than it is today. So, the hello world then. Most of you may already know this, but let's kind of just set the baseline. So I've got a few lines here, and that's really all you need to get yourself going with a hello world component in Content Hub 4.2. Not much to really say about it, right? It is what it is. But I do have a video which shows how we can add it. I've kind of cheated here by using a video, right? I with the 15-minute time frame, I didn't want to be at the mercy of demo gods, so I've gone for a video. I hope you'll forgive me. But here I'm going into the manage section. I go into pages, pick a page. I've set up an external components demo page, and we go and add a component to that page. I'm going to give it a name. There we are. This is exciting, right? This is good stuff. It's a wild ride. So anyway, so we go into the configuration of the component, and you'll see that I'm using a local host URL. As I say, it took me an embarrassingly long time to work that out, but it's kind of cool. I've not added any configuration here because it doesn't need it. We'll talk about that in a second. And then the video will just go and open the page, and you'll see that it says those two magic words that we all like to see. Hello world. I should have cut all of this out and made it quicker. There we go. Right, perfect. It worked. I can't act too surprised, given it's a video, right? So let's move on from that, right? We can start introducing some more interesting things here. So it's quite a simple requirement, but we'll all kind of know that there might be a requirement from a customer to have a button that's going to perform some action. We're not going to worry about what that action is, but how do we get a button on a page that does a thing? So here we go. There's some code here, and I'm going to kind of call out some things that I think are interesting about this. So firstly, as I said, we're using the material UI library here, which allows us to have the component match the look and feel of Content Hub. But not only that, because of the theme property on the context that you're provided in the render method, we can have it match the theme that is currently applied. So a user changes their theme, and your component is going to match that theme because of that property. That, I think, is awesome, right? That just by itself sells React components in 4.2 to me already. But we'll talk about some further things, but I think that, as I say, by itself is an awesome kind of thing. And also here, the other interesting thing, we're using the config property on the context object. So that, as we saw when we added the component, I added the URL and I had the option to add some configuration. In this case, I'm just using it to define an API endpoint that the button should call out to. And that kind of really allows for reusability of components, right? You can have the same component reused on different pages, but with slightly altered configuration if we need it. So here's here's just an example of the configuration. So we've got the URL, we've got that configuration object with the URL, and a little button of it a little video of it in action. In this case, I wired it up to just show a notification, right? But you get the concept that it's a button that does a thing, right? And we can do that in that 20 lines or so that I just showed. Okay. So let's take this further then. Let's turn this into a custom form control where we can both display some data and perhaps manipulate it and set it back. And for this, much more code, but still not anything complex. As I say, this is all listed on the blog that I'll provide a QR code to at the end, and it's got the full details on that blog. Here I've had to kind of pull some stuff out for ease of readability. But interesting things to call out here. So firstly, we're using our own React component. That opens up again that kind of reusability aspect. We can start pulling stuff out into their own components, have a library that we use to then build our external components that we're going to use in Content Hub. And we can also do all of the usual kind of React stuff, like using the state and the effect patterns there to maintain some state in that component, which is kind of exciting, right? All of this was possible before, but it just becomes so much easier and so much more intuitive now that we can do it in React rather than using Knockout. The second interesting thing here is this is in one of the later point releases of 4.2, but you now get a client property on that context object that gives you a pre-authenticated Content Hub JavaScript SDK client. You don't need to go and set that up. It's provided to you, and then you can use that to do, in this case, we are getting and setting the property of an entity, but you can do anything that it's just a JavaScript SDK client. Anything that SDK can do, you can utilize this for. In this case, as I say, we're getting and setting the properties on the entity as well as persisting it back. So some config there. Again, localhost, and I've got some config here that sets a URL of an API to go and get some data. In this case, it's place names that sit under the postcode SW1 in London, and which property on the entity we want the component to render for. In this case, it's name, and a little kind of demo of it in action. So at the top is our external component, that drop down. And underneath, I've put an entity details component, just so that we can see that the data on that entity changing. I think I probably did a few cycles round just to kind of show it happening, and a few page refreshes to show the persistence. But you can see there that we've got a component that sits there. It reads data, and we can pull data in from an external component, and we can set it back. Something a bit more advanced. This is much more concretely based on a user requirement. So there was a customer that wanted to provide a page whereby someone could load the details of a product and see two cultures of that product on the same screen for translation. So you might want to see a reference culture, such as ENUS, alongside a form to enter the localized values for another culture, such as French. And so the solution to this was to provide an external component that can show the value, be that reference point, right? Show the values on the entity in a given culture. And then we can just have a standard entity details component on the other side to do the persistence. I'm not going to show the code for this because it's a lot longer, but as I say, it's on that blog. So we've got some configuration here, and I'm just going to kind of load up the video of showing it in action. It sits on its own translation page, so we go into the products, and I've added an operation to the product search component called translate, which will take us to that page for the given product. And you can see on the left, there's the reference panel there. That's our external component, and it pulls in the cultures through the Content Hub API. So they're not cultures that have been defined by the component. It's pulling them in from Content Hub, and therefore, if you were to add more cultures in the future, that's going to reflect those. And then on the right, you've got the standard entity details component, where you can now enter the, in this case, currently French translation. Don't judge me on the quality of that translation, please. It comes from Google Translate, so blame them. And you've got the reference content on the left. So it makes it really easy for a translator to kind of have those two reference points. I think one of the interesting things about this is we didn't do this for the customer because there wasn't a requirement here to do this. But I think it doesn't take much to be able to see how you could replace that entity details component on the right with an external component that does something very similar, but is pulling in suggested translations from an external service, like a Google Translation API. And you can then have translations happening kind of partially automated. You know, you get that suggestion, but then you have that manual review of someone who can say, actually, I think this would be slightly better worded this way, or just accept it and we take that work out. So I think, you know, it really shows that there's some power here in external components. Because we're in Spain, I did a Spanish translation as well. And then the last part of this video just kind of goes back into the product, and we'll see it in those cultures so that you can see the persisted translation. Not that you don't believe me, but I thought I'd just validate it and show you. Anyway, so we've got the French translations there, and we should have a Spanish translation as well. There we are. So the takeaway from this is that external components in Content Hub 4.2 are powerful. I put it on a quote slide. I don't really know who said it, but I'm sure someone will either has or will. So I'm just going to, I thought I'd use the quote there. To summarize, these are the three things I want you to take away. External components in Content Hub 4.2 are awesome. They're really powerful. They can be hosted locally for development, and there is a starter template that makes things easier. But I'm also kind of sending out a call for assistance to make it better. There's some things that if you use it, you'll see. I won't spoil the surprise, but you'll see that maybe it can be improved in some ways. So that's all I've got. Thank you very much. Feel free to kind of connect with me. Having a name like Nicky Vadera means you can probably just search me and on any platform, and it's probably me. And there's the QR code there for the link to the blog about the content. Thank you very much.